Welcome to Rail Fans. I'm Shane Sege. Join us as we discover Ottawa's O Train, Toronto's subway, and Montreal's metro system together. Welcome to Rail Fans Canada. I'm Shane Sege, and joining me today is Terry Johnson of Transport Action Canada. How are you today?
Very well, Shane. Thanks for having me on your show.
So I'd like to start off by introducing people to Transport Action Canada. So can you tell us a little bit about this advocacy group?
So Transport Action Canada was founded as Transport 2000 back in 1976 with the help of Transport 2000 from the UK and also colleagues from Friends at the time. So we are a national umbrella group for public transportation advocacy, with the emphasis on sustainability and inclusiveness and making sure that wherever you are in Canada, that you actually have access to travel around our country, which is something that unfortunately a lot of us, I think, don't at this point. It's actually, as somebody who's a newcomer to Canada myself within the last 20 years, coming and finding that it's actually quite hard to get around this country in places. It's actually shocking because actually Canada was founded on the basis of infrastructure. They call it the country united by train, and now we're not really. And we're trying to turn that around and make a rail-based backbone of an integrated transportation system.
Now, Transport Action Canada deals with rail transportation, plane, among other types of methods of transportation. Today we're going to focus mostly on the rail aspects of your advocacy group. I'd like to start off by talking about high-frequency rail. Obviously that's a big topic in Canada right now, something that's poised to really revolutionize, improve, enhance the passenger rail service in Canada via Rail Canada. Can you talk a little bit about passenger rail and why is that so important to passenger rail in Canada?
The genesis of the high-frequency rail project really is, of course, that Via Rail has, over the past several decades, had a couple of cracks at the high-speed rail proposal. Or the government has commissioned high-speed rail studies, and then they've looked at it and said, but that's phenomenally expensive. And the reason it turns out to be phenomenally expensive to do that in North America is because to do high-speed rail, you cannot be classic compoundable in the way that the TGV or the ICE is in Europe, where you can run on the existing conventional tracks into city centres. Because the weight difference between a North American freight train and a TGV is a little bit daunting. So what we call high-performance rail and what the government has chosen to call high-frequency rail focuses a little bit more attention on some of the detail bits of making the journey work really well. And that includes making sure you have frequent and punctual service, because the moment you can strip out the couple of hours that you currently have to add into your day on the assumption that there might be some kind of delay, that's actually a huge saving. And that's at the organizational level. That's getting better control over the infrastructure, a better deal in terms of how you're accessing that infrastructure to know that the service is going to be reliable. And that's very low-hanging fruit, really. Now, with the high-frequency rail proposal, it doesn't solve all the problems of sharing infrastructure with freight. To access Montreal or with commuter services, to access downtown Toronto, to access Montreal, over some of its length, the line will be not a dedicated passenger line. It will be dependent on making sure that there are good, strong agreements in place to get trains through on time, to deliver on the promise that this project has. But it is really encouraging to see the government is now taking, at least in the Central Canada corridor, the idea that we need to invest in rail as a climate-friendly, economy-strengthening method of bringing Canadians together, and they're taking it seriously. That's really refreshing to see that.
So what kind of areas in passenger rail, specifically for Via Rail Canada, will improve with the high-frequency rail project? What changes does that bring about that enhance the service?
So the pitch for high frequency rail is twofold. One of them is an hourly service between Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, and Quebec City. Um, and that includes bringing back Peterborough and Trois-Rivières to the network, which of course they have not been part of the Canadian passenger rail network for nearly 3 decades, because some very, very misguided cuts that you look at it, and we took really big bets against passenger rail right at the moment that Europe was taking very big bets on passenger rail. So 40 years ago, when the first TGV was running, our first round of cuts, and then when the TGV Atlantique was built in 1990, there's Brian Mulrooney taking this huge bet against rail in Canada. I think it's time for Canada to admit that we lost this bet, and that's what this is going to do is turn the story around. And then the other pitch is that what this will do, because we won't be running quite so many end-to-end non-stop trains on the lakeshore route, is what Via Rail wants to do is to improve the service to a lot of the intermediate communities on the existing route, like Kingston or Brockville or Cornwall, so that they will have more convenient morning and evening trips in and out of the major cities. More trains will stop at the intermediate points rather than going through. Now, what we would really look forward to hearing is a strong commitment from the federal government that they are going to support that model of service on both lines, and that brings a lot of those communities is much more closely connected together. And then the one piece that is not in high frequency rail, because of course at the time high frequency rail was conceived, Ontario was talking about a HSR study in southwestern Ontario, which ultimately didn't happen, is west of Toronto down to Windsor and Sarnia. So we were quite encouraged to hear Minister Alghabra in London back in the summer say, yes, this is now on the table. We will look at improving VIA service in southwestern Ontario. But we know that VIA has already looked at this, and that a dedicated corridor solution is not on the table in southwestern Ontario. We don't have the underutilized corridor options that we do have between Toronto and Ottawa, and between along the north shore of St. Lawrence to reach Quebec City. So it's going to require a much more thoughtful approach to co-production with freight. And that's great, because actually we need to think like that. We also need to give the logistics industry reason to get trucks off the road and onto intermodal, to get our economy moving much faster and in a more environmentally friendly way in southwestern Ontario. So there's a silver lining to doing the hard work of ensuring that co-production with freight is a success.
Now, I want to just point out a couple interesting points about high frequency rail and the improvements that would hopefully come about with this project. And a lot of people aren't aware, but Via Rail operates for the most part right now on 98% of their track. It's CN or CP freight lines. So what happens is the Via Rail train has to yield or give priority to the freight trains. This creates those issues of reliability, scheduling, frequency. These are all things that can be addressed with the high frequency rail program and more dedicated rails, as you've been mentioning. Can you speak a little bit about this?
So it is still true that the agreement technically is that the passenger train has priority, and that the schedules are negotiated in advance so that you're not supposed to end up in those tangles. But if you start running late in one place, then you will end up running late in another place, because then you'll miss your path. And that especially applies now that Metrolinx owns a lot of the infrastructure around Toronto. And when you get to Pickering, or when you get to Aldershot, and you're transitioning from CN to Metrolinx, and Metrolinx also has very busy corridors. If you've been delayed on one spot of your journey, then that's going to cause a cascading delay, and that's also the case where there are single track sections. If you don't meet the time you were supposed to be there, then you'll end up delaying yourself or another train later in the day. And it's also partly, I think, because VIA has, for the last 10 years, been very, very equipment constrained. So if one train is late, then its equipment is not ready to form the next train that equipment was supposed to form later in the day. So that train becomes late too. So high frequency rail combined with a new fleet actually addresses a lot of these problems, because now there will be considerably more trains available in the corridor, so they'll be able to boost the schedule and have more resilience. Having majority dedicated tracks will reduce a lot of those conflicts. It will allow the trains to cruise faster for longer distances, which is why we're able to look at a significant drop in the travel time between Toronto and Ottawa, and between Montreal and Quebec City. And because the majority of it is via dedicated, it's slightly less daunting to them than do the hard work of making everything pass nicely together when you do meet shared trackage. So I think there's a lot going for it that way, and but the real benefit of high frequency rail, one of the biggest selling points of high frequency rail, is fast implementation. Not spending another 10 years thinking about doing this, but actually getting on with it. We're a little dismayed, actually, it's taken the government this long to go to procurement on this one, because it would have actually been a lot easier to move faster and to be working much more in concert with Metrolinx and with the REM and other players in the transportation and in industry, to make sure that infrastructure projects are aligned with each other and compatible with each other. So I think, but now the government has promised to start procurement, this next month. So we are really looking forward to getting into the details of what that's going to look like, because there were a lot of details that remain under wraps. La Presse got hold of a document last week. It's still heavily redacted. There are still a lot of questions we have. What is the exact route to reach Union Station in Toronto? How are we untangling the situation in Montreal to get trains through and onto the North Shore, now that it looks technically infeasible? I wouldn't say impossible, but technically infeasible to engage in a co-production relationship with the REM through the tunnel. How are we going to do that in a way that doesn't either cost a lot more money or cause a much longer journey time? So there are some answers to be had in the next month or so, I hope, on these questions. And we know that the work has been going on in the background throughout the last 2 years. The Joint Project Office has been diligently working away on this throughout the pandemic. So we're hopeful that we're going to like what we see when all this stuff gets published. A lot of the questions that we first asked when high frequency rail was first proposed, we are still waiting for answers. One of the things we've had an answer to, which is great, is they are looking at electric traction. That will immediately take us to a very, very low carbon, very attractive system, and I think it will also give faster acceleration, which means that you'll spend more time running at the 200 kilometers an hour the system will be capable of. So your end-to-end times on these trains and end-to-end average speeds will actually almost certainly exceed what, for example, Amtrak Acela does in the Northeast Corridor, even though on paper it's a faster train. Because at the end of the day, top speed is actually the hardest and most expensive thing to fix for. Average speed and really good connectivity at the endpoints, and being able to get people on and off the train quickly at the stations, all of those things are a lot easier to fix. So we're also still looking, What are we going to do about this thing where we all queue up as though it's an airport at Union Station? Because it's not an airport, it's a train station. The rest of the world doesn't do this anymore. Because you can save half an hour. You'd have to go a lot faster to save half an hour just on train speed. But if you try and save half an hour on boarding, it's a lot cheaper.
No, those are definitely really good points. And one of them that you touched on was the renewal of the fleet of Via Rail in the corridor going between Windsor and Quebec City. We saw a first look at that yesterday in Ottawa with the new Siemens SC42 train sets. Those are going to be really stunning trains. Can you speak a little bit about what your thoughts are on these new trains? I know you got to see them and experience it as well. What are your thoughts, and how do you think this is going to change the experience?
Really pleased with the job that Siemens has done on this. There's a lot of similarity here with the trains that were initially produced in Europe for the Austrian railjet service, which is actually something that we've used for the last 10 years. And so this is how it's done, guys. This is how you do really great rail service without spending billions and billions and billions and billions on new corridors. The Austrians have solved that, and the equipment. So this is actually the same equipment they used in Austria very significantly, and it was then, of course, deployed for the Bright Line service in Florida, and it's on order for similar equipment is on order for Amtrak. But there are significant differences with the Canadian version of the train. The Canadian version of the train is push-pull. So it's got a cab car. That's a piece of unique engineering that was created for the Canadian version of this train. There will be a California version which actually builds on the work that's been done for us, but it means the train no longer has to spend an hour, 2 hours going around a Y in Windsor or Sarnia, and that's actually a really big issue because to turn the trains in Sarnia at the moment you have to go all the way across the En's Yard and then all the way back again. So it causes a tremendous amount of disruption to the freight through the tunnel to do this. And of course CN don't love that, which is one of the reasons why Sarnia only has one train a day. So having a push-pull train that is bidirectional can go in and turn around and come straight out again. Hopefully that makes it possible to bring back 2, 3, 4 trains a day as Sarnia once had. That's the kind of opportunity that this train brings. Obviously, it was absolutely essential to replace the LRC equipment. It's now 40 years old. Also, the Renaissance equipment, even though it's only 25 years old, it was built for European use. It was built for European climate. It is also at the end of its life. So, VIA was looking in deep trouble until the government said, yes, we are going to put the money on the table to replace the trains to make sure that we have a really high quality train for the next generation of corridor service in Canada. And from an accessibility point of view, the work that has been done to build mock-ups, have an accessibility advisory committee, have people try it out, tweak things, make sure that whether your accessibility needs are visual, mobility, auditory, whatever they are, that this train is going to be much more welcoming, much more inclusive, much easier to use. That's huge. That's really, 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 really welcome. We were quite a long way behind on that in Canada, and now we're catching up with some of the best examples that you would see on new trains in Europe or Asia. So it's good. And it's going to be comfortable. The seats look significantly deeper than the ones that were introduced in the last 10 years on some of the corridor equipment that some people find a little hard. So I think the level of comfort's going up. That'll be welcome too. And we understand that there's going to be a pretty nice espresso machine option as well as just the regular coffees. So the onboard. We don't quite know exactly what the onboard service is going to look like, but VIA's onboard service and corridor has already been quite good. I think there's going to be one or two opportunities to make it even better.
Now, some of the interesting things that you brought up about the train, the accessibility, just looking at it on the test train the other day, very impressed to see how big and welcoming the accessible washroom as it is a massive improvement over something that was literally the size of one you would find on an airplane, which is not accessible by any means. This is really a significant size increase, 2, 3, maybe 4 times bigger. We also see the aisles down the center of the cars are larger too, making it easier to get through and not being bottled up if there's somebody coming down.
Yeah,
So can you talk a little bit
all of
more?
all of the vestibules between the cars, all the doors are automatic. The gangways between the cars are fully sealed, so you don't have snow blowing in and drafts when you're trying to move between the cars anymore. The other thing that's a big difference our trains versus the American ones is ours are semi-permanently coupled sets. So there's no slack action in the train. It'll be a much smoother ride. Should be really good. The elephant in the room is that the rest of Canada is looking at this wonderful train for the corridor and saying, "Hey guys, where's ours?" And I think that is a very legitimate question. When the LRC trains were launched in the summer of 1981, the vision actually included running those trains between Calgary and Edmonton and making that the same level of high performance, frequent service that we have in Eastern Canada. And for political reasons, that didn't happen. A few months later, the whole picture for rail in Canada was looking a lot less rosy. These trains would be absolutely ideal. We know that there's a proposal at the moment from Alstom and AECOM to build full high-speed rail out there, but that will be expensive and that will take at least a decade to deliver. Whereas if you use the high performance model that actually is proven to work in North America, it works very well in California, it works in North Carolina, Michigan have done it, where you can use a lot of existing infrastructure, and when you do spend money, actually it becomes a win-win for both passenger and freight. And you can get up to 110 miles an hour, 125 miles an hour, so 170 kilometers an hour, 200 kilometers an hour. That's a hugely more attractive proposition than making the drive up the highway between those two cities. And because you're not trying to go to full high-speed rail, you can stop at places like Airdrie, and you can connect those other communities along the route. We'd love to see that kind of thing being thought through and used to put some meat on the bones of the government's proposals to reach a net zero economy. Rail is one of the easiest solutions. And then for the longer distance services, that's the next big thing that needs to change. We just talk so much about accessibility. In all of Canada, there are only 6 accessible sleeping car compartments. It's ridiculous. And the fleet that Via Rail uses on its long distance services was built in 1955. And the original build quality of that fleet and the choice of stainless steel has made it last this long. But at some point in the not too distant future, that age of that fleet is going to catch up with us, and we need to be procuring now the next generation of long distance trains for Canada that will form the backbone of our transportation network through the latter half of the century and be the thing which keeps a lot of communities right across this community connected. The Americans talk a lot about flyover states. We don't want to have that in Canada. We want our prairie provinces, our Atlantic region, to be deeply connected to each other. We want to be a deeply connected country, at least I believe so. And to do that, we need to make another fairly significant investment, and that's going to be to turn around long distance rail.
Now, my other point I wanted to discuss is when you look at a map of how much rail and how much coverage there was in the passenger network, let's say 20, 30, 40 years ago, and then you overlay that with what you have now. It's shocking how much has been removed, discontinued, and essentially left to rot, let's say. the connectivity, as you pointed out, is significantly less now than it was in the past. People often say Canada was built on the rail, built on the train. We've really let that go. Can you comment a bit about this and what has happened to the network over the years?
So it would be a fantastic idea, I think, for the next election. Let's have one of the election debates be in Brandon, Manitoba, and you've all got to get there by public transport. Because right now you can't. You cannot get to Brandon, Manitoba by public transport of any form, rail or bus, at all. Right now you cannot get a bus across this country. There was briefly for a few months this summer, Ryder Express had extended their service from Regina to Winnipeg. They've had to suspend it again, but there's no federal leadership of network thinking, and that actually is really, really bad for the industry, because when Greyhound pulled out of Western Canada, that cost hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, even to carriers in the Maritimes who'd been using the service, selling through tickets, sending through packages. You can't use bus package service right across the country anymore, and that's used for all kinds of things on the small business level. Getting parts shipped quickly to garages or to farms to get stuff repaired that needs to be repaired. You don't have that. Suddenly you have to use a dedicated vehicle. Courier service is much more expensive. It really, really blows up the cost of living not to have this network. And you see efforts to kind of restore one piece of the network. And you can't really do that without you can't throw a bunch of leaves in the air and expect it's going to make a tree. You have to have the trunks, you have to have the branches, you have to have the network thinking, and that requires a bill leadership from the federal government to say, yeah, this is we are a unified country. We want interprovincial travel to work effectively. We need to actually nurture this ecosystem to bring it back. And one of the things that really drove a lot of the cuts to the rail industry, passenger rail particularly, was lobbying by the bus industry, saying, they compete head to head with us, and that's been so foolish in Canada. And we've seen where that's led us now. Greyhound gone, the bus industry really, really fragmented. Really hard for people to work out how to use the bus network at the moment to get around. Services coming and going as small companies try to fill these massive gaps. Some good work has been done on ticketing integration between these bus companies. But in other places, you're out of luck. You might, even though there might be a bus coming into town from the east and another one leaving from the west, they might not even stop at the same place, and there might not be a legitimate way to get between them without walking several miles. And if you have a system where ticketing is integrated, you also have a system where the responsibility for the customer if something goes wrong is properly assigned. And for example, if you're a student from Newfoundland and you're going away to university, and you're going to make this journey that involves a bus, a ferry, another bus, a train, probably another bus. At the moment, you have to try and be your own travel agent, put all the pieces together, and you might get stuck somewhere in the middle of the night because there's no guarantee of the connectivity. We want that to be guaranteed when you buy a ticket from A to B. That contract for carriage is going to be honoured, and if you get stuck somewhere, it's going to be clear who it is who's got to pay for that hotel room or who's got to rely on alternate transportation. So that's it's getting all the pieces to work together. That sounds expensive, but actually it's not really, because what that does is it means that what currently a lot of buses that are running without full capacity will be full because people will actually be able to use them. And if you connect bus to rail and you're feeding passengers to and from each other, rather than trying to go head to head, everybody's going to win. And that's something that we really need to do in this country is look at what's working elsewhere in the world. I mean, one of the reasons the Amtrak does so well, and one of the reasons a lot of the bus network in the U.S. is still there to some of the more far-flung communities, are the throughway bus connections, where you're buying a through ticket on Amtrak on the bus. The gold standard on this is the Swiss. They have federally run railways. They have transportation systems that are municipal responsibilities or cantonal responsibilities. They have privately owned systems, and it's all part of the Swiss travel system. And if you buy a ticket from A to B, that's a ticket from A to B, and everything works. And it's not rocket science. It's information technology, but it's not rocket science to make that kind of thing happen. And when you make it happen, everybody wins. The carriers win, and the passenger in particular wins.
Now, you brought up the Swiss system, how efficient, well-connected, guaranteed reliable it can be. Can you name a couple other examples around the world where transportation is very integrated, reliable, it has connections to any point practically that people want to go to? And what makes those systems successful?
What's really made a big difference in a lot of the European countries over the last couple of years is, and this is actually a really big success story, is the way the European railways have separated the infrastructure and operations in such a way that infrastructure access has been democratized, been made fair for both freight and passenger, and it's allowed operators to innovate. So, even just 5 to 10 years ago, people were saying, overnight trains in Europe are on the way out. But then again, it's the Austrians did this. They worked out that actually there was a huge demand for an overnight train as an alternative to getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and jumping on a plane somewhere. That comfortable overnight journey could be delivered at a reasonably affordable price that students could afford to travel around Europe, and that it could be modernized and modern equipment, equipment refreshed. And now they've got modern equipment on order that is really nice. Individual bunks and stuff like that are quite useful innovations. A good increase in privacy while keeping the price low, and they turned around the whole overnight rail travel situation in Europe. And that I actually read a book written only 5 years ago that was basically the obituary of night trains in Europe. And in just 5 years, that has been turned on its head by people who are smart about marketing, and because infrastructure access in Europe is well organized. And now there's most of the national rail operators are getting back into the night train market. You see private companies getting into the market as well, and it really is competing very strongly with the short haul air market. And you see some of the European countries now turning around and saying, we just cannot justify the carbon cost of these bunny hop flights when you could do the same journey by train in about the same time once you've worked out how much time you actually spend lining up at the gate at an airport. And the interesting thing is that actually airlines like Air France, KLM, or Lufthansa also win when you do this, because now you could have a bigger, wide-body, more efficient aircraft come into a hub, and then people get to their final destinations around the country by train. So you're suddenly making much more efficient use of your rail infrastructure and your airport infrastructure. So it's when you come to this and you look for what is the most efficient way of making a fully connected network, then you end up solving a lot of the environmental problems. You end up solving a lot of the problems for passengers in terms of how easy something is to use. And then because you've done that, you solve the fiscal problem. Suddenly the whole thing doesn't require tons of subsidy anymore because it works properly. Via Rail in the 5 years to 2019 was doing such a phenomenal job of growing passenger numbers, and that was down to some increases in frequency and some increases in marketing, some tweaks to the pricing model. But the pent up demand for good quality ground transportation in Canada was very, very obvious in seeing how that evolved from 3.5 to 5 million passengers in just a couple of years. Canadians want to be able to travel reliably, on time, in comfort, in an environmentally friendly way. Um, the demands are there to do it.
You made mention to airports. And when you think of airports, you think of going through security, you think of dropping off your bag, checking in, waiting and waiting, boarding the plane, any number of situations that can arise after you get on the plane that prevent it from leaving on time, and then reaching your destination, getting off the plane, reclaiming your baggage, possibly having to go through customs, or if you're traveling domestically, then you wouldn't have to deal with that. If we look at a trip from Ottawa to Toronto, it's about a 45 minute flight. But when you factor in how much time that you spend getting to the airport, the process through the airport, the process once you reach the far end, reclaiming your baggage, and finally leaving and getting yourself downtown.
Or making it onward.
It adds up very quickly. And then when you look at a train station, which can be located downtown in a more practical location, directly connected to major public transportation, why don't more people use the train in this case?
Actually, one of the reasons more people don't use the train in this country at the moment is that VIA was selling out every single seat it had on many trains before the pandemic hit. We're literally running everything that could turn a wheel in the corridor and selling every seat on it. Because the demand was there. People get this. That driving 6 or 8 hours is not fun, and then you arrive exhausted. A flight where you probably spend a lot more time, boarding, taxiing, landing, taxiing again, getting to the gate, getting off the plane, than you actually spend in the air, isn't you don't gain very much time. I had a appointment I wanted to make here in Chatham, Ontario yesterday after our event in Ottawa, and I looked at it and said, is this possible if I try and fly to Toronto? But I looked at it and it wasn't going to gain me anything at all. It wasn't, by the time I got back from the airport to downtown Toronto to get to onward transportation to get to where I live, no gains. Just more stress. And I think the one point that VIA has begun to market itself on is that if you can work on your laptop, or you can work remotely, then if you have a 3-hour train journey, then you can probably spend 2.5 hours of that journey working, if you want to. Or if you don't want to work, then you actually can spend a whole solid block of time relaxing, which is also something that is really, really important in a world where a lot more people do have flexible work, gig economy jobs. Is block work time and block relaxation time. I actually find them hard to come by, and one of the reasons I enjoy taking the train is because I have that choice. One thing people really need to know is we are absolutely blessed in this country to have a historic train, the Canadian. The vision that was exercised to buy that equipment in 1955. Fantastic. It's a really good trip. It is a really beautifully conceived train that was created with lots and lots of small social spaces on board, that the domes, the boroughs, the lounges, that make it more than just a journey, make it a traveling community. But what the other thing people need to realize is, you want to ride that train, you really should do it within the next 5 years, because it is going to be 75 years old very, very soon. And to run equipment of that age in everyday mainline service is increasingly hard. And so we want to see something brought to fruition which will be a worthy successor to that, and that will continue attracting people to Canada and serving Canadians for the next 75 years. One thing I really want to talk about, because it's come up, and the federal government is aware of this, is the issue of rural and indigenous communities and isolation. We have a huge problem in this country with rural isolation and with indigenous Canadians not having a safe way to travel. And we need to solve this. It is not okay to say, okay, well, the majority of Canadians now live in the big cities, so we're just going to connect to the big cities. That's not okay. We really need to fully connect the whole country. And we're pleased to see the federal government has now come forward with rural indigenous transportation solutions funding. At this point, it's very small. It will not be enough to solve all the problems, but it will be a start. We've been quite pleased with the success in Ontario of something they call the Community Transportation Grants Program, that has allowed a lot of the smaller towns in Ontario to be reconnected to each other. But a lesson can be learned from that, because it was a grant program, so only those municipalities who had the resources to apply for the grant were able to actually deliver a service. So some of the smallest municipalities, where you've only got 2 or 3 people administering the township, didn't have the bandwidth to write up this huge application that was needed. But their citizens sure as heck, edit this. Their citizens surely need same access to transportation that everybody else enjoys. So you need a bit of leadership and capacity building to make these things work. And one of the things we said when it first came out is, you're going to need interline ticketing and coordination between these services. And there were some people in government who tried to tell us that wasn't going to be a problem. And what we're actually finding now is that all the municipalities in southwestern Ontario have put together a roundtable to make that happen, because everybody knows that it needs to happen. And again, this comes down to public transportation ends up being like a big orchestra. You've got rail, bus, transit, LRT, remote air services, and if you don't have a conductor, you don't get the result you wanted. And that really is a role for the federal government. It doesn't have to be a heavy regulatory role, but it does have to be a role, a leadership role, a vision role. Say, it's not okay that there is no longer a bus service between Winnipeg and Regina. And if the market, if private sector can't provide that at the moment, why not? How do we create the conditions where this thing can happen, either in the private or public sector, but in any case in a way that is effective, that is efficient, that gives Canadians the mobility they want.
Those are very good points, and that's definitely an important topic as we look to those communities that are definitely struggling and underserved, and they definitely deserve better service, better connectivity, better possibilities and opportunities to be able to move around safely, reliably, and securely throughout the region and throughout the country. So I definitely appreciate you bringing up that point. That's definitely a very important point. So Terry Johnson, thank you very much for your time today. Thank you for speaking to us about passenger rail in Canada and all the multiple facets that are involved with bringing these kind of projects together. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Shane, and thank you to everybody who's listening.